The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
What do the life, times, and death of John McCain reveal about America? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com. And as a more than week-long tribute to the late John McCain concludes this weekend in Washington, we'll discuss whether the eulogies about McCain are in keeping with his record and what this lengthy salute to his life reveals about our nation. The Catholic Church in crisis. Revelations of sexual abuse over decades in Pennsylvania is followed up by charges that the Pope restored power to a proven sexual predator. We'll bring in one of the nation's most prominent Catholics, George Weigel, to analyze a very bad year for the Catholic Church. Plus, Scott Cozenza joins us for Talkin' Liberty, an analysis of the president's threats against Google.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
But we start with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class on the events and issues of the day. Creating false crises has become a specialty of a left wing in America that's becoming more frustrated by President Trump with each passing week. Frustrated to the breaking point by a surging and roaring economy, record low unemployment numbers across the board, and this week, a new, stronger trade deal with Mexico that's likely to be followed up by another deal with Canada, and suppress all that talk about trade wars the left hoped would break out with Trump's hardline trade policy, leveraging America's strength. And based on the simple reality that the countries of the world are more dependent on the U.S. than we are on them. So the left retreated to their usual place of being offended by everyday language from the newly minted Republican gubernatorial nominee in Florida. Here is the famous monkey up line from Ron DeSantis calling for a continuation of the current Florida Republican governor's economic success, and the reaction from his progressive Democrat opponent, Andrew Gillum.
The last thing we need to do is to monkey this up by trying to embrace a socialist agenda with huge tax increases and bankrupting the state.
It's very clear that Mr. DeSantis is taking a page directly from the campaign manual of Donald Trump. In the handbook of Donald Trump, they no longer do whistle calls. They're now using full bullhorn.
But that was just political speak. It was echoed and embellished by leftist media and academic elites across the country like Eddie Glaude of Princeton, condemning the whole country under the withering questioning of Mika Brzezinski on MSNBC's barely watched show Morning Joe.
That's obviously a racial dog whistle, but we're at a crossroads. We've been at crossroads before: the Civil War, Reconstruction, the New Deal, the Civil Rights Movement. And in each moment in which we were at a crossroads, something changed, but we've always doubled down on our prejudices. So here we are once again. We are right back where we've always been, where we have to make a decision whether or not we're going to be a racist nation.
Well, I didn't know we could make a snap decision on being racist like that. I guess I vote for not being a racist nation. But of course, we are a racist nation. Never mind that almost 1 million people gave their lives in the Civil War that ended slavery. Now, to Mr. Glaude and his fellow neo-Marxist faculty lounge academic Ivy League elites, we are not a racist nation, but rather a nation containing some racists like all other nations. But actual racist nations, if there are such a thing, don't sacrifice the lives of 1 million people, most of them white, to end black slavery. Mr. Glaude, you can even look it up. But the insanity on the left was just as perfectly embodied on ESPN, which is supposed to be a sports channel but now fancies itself a vessel for social justice warriors. It all started with this seemingly innocent and diplomatic statement by golfing legend Tiger Woods after finishing play in the latest PGA Tour event when asked about Donald Trump.
He's the president of the United States, and you have to respect the office. And no matter who's in the office, he may dislike personality or the politics, but we all must respect the office.
Do you have anything more broadly to say about the state, I guess, the discourse of race relations?
No, I just finished 72 holes and really hungry.
I personally love that last part. Just finished 72 holes and I'm really hungry. Sidestepping the waiting landmine planted by that reporter. But listen to the outrage from ESPN angry privileged white guy Max Kellerman and perpetually angry black guy Stephen A. Smith.
It really bothers me. I am angry at what Tiger Woods said. It either holds in contempt the intelligence of the people who hear it, or else it's just a stupid thing to say. If to say that the office, you must have respect for the office. Tiger, be clear. Are you saying that the office therefore confers respect onto its occupant? Tiger, is that what you're saying? If that's what you're saying, that is a stupid comment.
We don't know what Tiger Woods believes. He's Camblinasian. He's not black.
So I guess when Tiger wins a big tournament, he's black. But when he refuses to condemn Donald Trump, he's not black. And really what's most remarkable about that white guy, Max Kellerman, is his breathtaking lack of self-awareness, convincing himself that anyone cares what he thinks about politics. Maybe that's why ESPN's viewership has been dropping like a rock for the last couple of years. The price of being part of the resistance, I suppose. But there's even greater lunacy from the left this week. Listen to the most appropriately named man on TV, Don Lemon of CNN, extol the virtues of the violent, fascistic, anti-fascist group Antifa.
It says it right in the name, Antifa, anti-fascism, which is what they were there fighting. Listen, there's, no organization is perfect. There was some violence. No one condones the violence, but there were different reasons for Antifa and for these neo-Nazis to be there. One, racist fascists. The other group fighting racist fascists. There's a distinction there.
There's some violence? Some violence? Is Mr. Lemonade aware that Antifa members who claim to be anti-fascist protect their identity with hoods just like the KKK? They wear all black outfits just like Mussolini's roving gangs and beat people bloody for espousing the wrong political views in public and private, just like in Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. If you want proof of the left's historic ties to fascism, go see Dinesh D'Souza's latest movie, Death of a Nation. But we saved the biggest whopper of a Say What for last. This is NBC's diminutive host of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, dismissing the notion of media bias as he discusses it with a reporter from the Christian Broadcasting Network.
One of the best things going in Donald Trump's favor, we know this, is the mainstream media. I hate to say it. I know I'm sitting on a Meet the Press roundtable, but the truth of the matter is 62% think the media is biased. So in other words, if you look at the approval rating of Donald Trump,
the conservative echo chamber created that environment. It's not. No. I mean, it has been a tactic and a tool of the Roger Ailes created echo chamber. So let's not pretend it's not anything other than that.
Independents also distrust the media. This is not just Republicans. It is many Americans across.
No. I take your point. I'm just saying it was a creation. It was a campaign tactic. It's not like based in much.
Media bias, just a campaign talking point, not based in much. The lack of self-awareness and blindness to what normal, regular Americans see as obvious, like so many of his fellow travelers in the biased elite media, Mr. Todd is utterly clueless. Up next, crisis in the Catholic Church.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner, an alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Without the liberal bias. LN Radio. Syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV. The right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast. Fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cozenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
Truth is making a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Grisly allegations of sexually abusive clergy in Chile, Honduras, Ireland, Great Britain, Australia, and the U.S. The former Cardinal of Washington unmasked as a serial sexual predator. Clueless and bureaucratic responses to these crimes from some bishops seemingly incapable of sharing the rage being expressed by their people. Unprecedented charges of inattention to sexual abuse against a sitting pope leveled by a retired Vatican diplomat, stonewalling in Rome, unhinged polemics across the spectrum of Catholic opinion. Where is the holiness of the Church in all of this? Those are the words of one of America's most prominent Catholics in Saturday's Wall Street Journal. He's the author of the official biography of Pope John Paul, Witness to Hope, among his almost 24 books, senior fellow at the Washington-based Ethics and Public Policy Center, my friend George Weigel. George, many thanks for joining us.
Tim, good to be with you, although it's not the happiest of circumstances.
Well, it isn't, of course, and yet there's always a tendency for the establishment media to press their feet on the throats of the Catholic Church and diminish Christianity in general. So let me start by asking you, what in the mainstream reporting on this story or narrative, this annus horribilis, this horrible year as you describe it, has been accurate and fair, and what has not?
Well, I think the reporting on the overseas cases, this very bad situation in Chile, a situation of what appears to be very bad abuse of seminarians in Honduras, I think that's been reasonably straightforward. It hasn't been that straightforward in the U.S. What really ignited this summer of horrors after the revelations about Archbishop McCarrick was the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which involved some 680 abuse cases. What the media didn't really tell you was that was over a 70-year period, and that only 23 of those cases have been since 2002, when the U.S. bishops put some very stringent rules into place to deal with abuse charges. So you're left with the impression that this is going on all over the place right now. That's not a fair impression. That having been said, the really unfortunate spinning from the mainstream media in recent days has been on these charges from the former Vatican ambassador to the U.S., Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, that Pope Francis had been warned by him about reports that Cardinal McCarrick, as he then was a serial predator. Virtually the entire storyline on this, with a few exceptions, but virtually the entire storyline has been kill the messenger. And that's just not right. That's a very serious allegation. It deserves a serious response. That response has not been forthcoming from the Vatican.
Is it helpful, George, for the Pope to tell the world, as he did this week, that he, quote, won't say a single word, unquote, about this scandal? Why would he adopt such a position?
Well, he said that about this specific allegation from Archbishop Vigano, that Vigano had warned him about McCarrick. I think it would be extremely helpful if the Holy Father would respond to that. I think the people of the Church deserve that response. I think the world deserves that response. I have known Archbishop Vigano for a long time, and I believe him to be a man who would not deliberately make a false accusation. If the Pope was warned and for whatever reason chose not to take an action, I think that ought to be out on the record.
Now, as you've referred to, the most troubling of these reports is that this Pope, in effect, reinstated or promoted Cardinal Theodore McCarrick to a position of greater influence, offering advice, for example, on the naming of bishops, after his predecessor, Pope Benedict, had sanctioned McCarrick for years of serial sexual abuse of young boys, as in the report by Archbishop Vigano. Why would a man like Cardinal McCarrick not be removed from the Church altogether after it became clear what he had done?
Well, these are the two questions on the table, Tim. First of all, was McCarrick sanctioned by Pope Benedict XVI and told to simply retire to a life of prayer and penance? That is one claim by Archbishop Vigano. Second claim by Archbishop Vigano is that he warned Pope Francis about these allegations against Cardinal McCarrick, and that hasn't been responded to either. So those are two very serious allegations, and they deserve a serious response. I don't see what good is served by the Holy Father simply saying, well, look, you people look into this. This is what he said in the press conference on the flight back from Dublin this past Sunday, and draw your own conclusions. This is not about priest predators. This is about bishops failing to deal with that.
We greatly appreciate you joining us today, George.
Thanks, Tim. Always good to talk to you.
George Weigel. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss what the last week of tributes to John McCain reveals about America.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
I've always believed it's pure hypocrisy to elevate a man in death way above and beyond what they were in life. It doesn't mean we dishonor those who've passed, but it does the dead no service to be disingenuous about their legacy. 82 years of living is not canceled out by the fact of death. So let's spend a minute trying to understand the legacy of the late Arizona Senator John McCain, who's being lauded this weekend in the nation's capital, from the standpoint of what this reveals about the country. It reveals that we love war heroes always and forever, no matter what they do when they return to the homeland. Thousands lined the streets of Phoenix to pay their respects to John McCain this week, and many more in Washington. It seems odd not that we place on a pedestal a man who endured unspeakable cruelty in an enemy prison, but that we don't pay much attention to the ones who performed heroically and were not captured. Maybe that's what Donald Trump meant when he made that famous remark that stoked McCain's vengeful spirit against him. The honor given McCain this week reveals that the loudest and most dissenting voices get the most traction. In this way, and perhaps only this way, McCain had much in common with the man he hated, President Trump. McCain was always ready with a snappy soundbite that the elite media would gobble up, like when he said that Trump had brought out all the crazies. You know, the working folk McCain would fly over in his many trips back and forth between D.C. and Arizona. Indeed, the celebration of McCain's life also reveals that if you offer the establishment media what they crave, in this case a Republican always willing to criticize or attack another Republican, you'll get the face time on TV that creates the appearance that you're really important, more important than you really are. It reveals that you can get away with promising one thing as a candidate and delivering something very different when you get to Washington. McCain always campaigned in Arizona as a rock-ribbed, reliable conservative, and then became a constant high-profile dissenter from conservative orthodoxy on Capitol Hill. It was a formula that served McCain well throughout his career, but also meant he commanded little respect among real conservatives and was not well liked by his fellow senators. That's just the truth. And John McCain's legacy reveals that a survivor of relentless physical torture can accumulate enough support among the voters to also survive multiple political misfortune or misdeeds. Here's what I mean. Beyond all the sound bites and sideshows, there were 5 actual bottom-line headlines in McCain's political career, apart from his military career, the ones that should bring his political legacy into sharper focus. Now, the first came early in his Senate career when he was embroiled in the massive Keating 5 banking scandal. Fittingly, it seems, he was the only Republican among the 5 senators who were accused of corruption in trying to shut down a federal investigation of their major supporter, Charles Keating, chairman of the infamous Lincoln Savings and Loan. McCain managed to wiggle his way out of what was a major national scandal better than the other 4 senators, and still somehow went on to be reelected 5 more times. The second headline would be his signature McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform bill, which suppressed political speech in the run-up to national elections. It was widely condemned as a flagrant violation of the First Amendment in limiting exactly the kind of speech the founders protected above all others, political speech. And it was deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in the famous or infamous Citizens United case. The third headline in McCain's legacy would be his championing of the ultimately disastrous Iraq War, the centerpiece of his neoconservative worldview of a muscular America which would make liberal use of military force seemingly whenever possible. That war led to his own resounding defeat in the fourth headline of McCain's career, his presidential campaign in 2008 when he was overwhelmed by Barack Obama. And then after the campaign said essentially it was a good thing the country elected Obama, leading millions who voted for him to wonder if he was ever really committed to winning. And the fifth and final headline would be McCain's single vote that killed a repeal of Obamacare in the Senate last year. This was the whipped cream, the cherry on top of McCain's history of thwarting his own party and his own presidents. Like when he was one of only 3 Republicans to vote against the Bush tax cuts after Bush's people pulled off a political dirty trick against him in the 2000 presidential race. McCain was similarly one of 3 Republicans to kill the repeal of Obamacare after Trump said a couple of years earlier that McCain was not his kind of war hero because he was captured. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. But McCain's life proves that vengeance can be yours in the political sphere. It worked for McCain. He torpedoed Bush, torpedoed his party, torpedoed Trump, but is now being hailed as a national hero and genuine political maverick. Appropriately enough, a Democrat, Joe Biden, was the featured speaker at McCain's memorial service in Phoenix, and perhaps channeling his late friend, took a thinly veiled swipe at President Trump. So perhaps the most significant thing revealed by the life, times, and death of John McCain is that America will evidently always place what a guy does in uniform above what he does in office. Quick break, and then, is the president's beatdown on Google a good or bad thing? We'll talk it over with Scott Cozenza in Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories, with LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner, an alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts, just the facts, ma'am, without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV, the right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast, fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cozenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because Truth
is making a
comeback.
And now it is time for Talkin' Liberty as we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and editor of those things illegal as well, Scott Cozenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Okay, let's talk search engines, social media, First Amendment, free speech, starting with an aide to President Trump, that would be Larry Kudlow, saying President weighing regulations on Google's search engine that he considers rigged. So is this...
And then, if I may interrupt, and then followed up by the man himself, President Trump, after those Kudlow statements, he said in the Oval Office, quote, "I think that Google and Twitter and Facebook, they are really treading on very, very troubled territory, and they have to be careful." What's troubling about that, Tim, is that the President of the United States is threatening the free speech rights of Google, Facebook, Twitter, and the other social media companies for how they craft, for instance, with respect to Google. The President was critical of their search result page when people searched on him. Right. And Google owes no duty to anybody except for the duty of forthrightness. So they can't say, we're giving you neutral results when they're not neutral, for instance. That may be fraud. But other than that, however they describe their searches is their free speech.
Well, I think it's important to point out, because many people somehow don't get this, that there's a difference between free speech that's guaranteed by the government, political speech, and the speech of private organizations. And Google and Facebook and Twitter, and yes, it's true that 96% of the search results that you get when you put Donald Trump into Google are negative about him. Nevertheless, they are a private company. So when we get into the idea of government trying to regulate a private company, however despicable their actions might be, we start really messing with a fundamental freedom.
Yeah, what's despicable is to tell another person what they can and cannot say, whether that's individually or collectively through their corporate organization. That is where the evil is most of all. And I would just say this on the sort of government free speech versus private free speech. Of course, that is correct, that private actors cannot be compelled to honor the speech of others because they're not guaranteed that, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't get to come into your house and say whatever I want, okay? But I would say that privately, we need to encourage those private actors to honor principles surrounding free speech. So I support, if he wasn't the President of the United States who had access to the regulatory and enforcement state threatening Google, if Donald Trump was a private citizen who said, we need to make sure that, that Google doesn't do this, they're treading on
shaky ground.
Yeah, exactly. I would support that statement, and I make that statement myself. They are treading on shaky ground.
Right.
They need to stop it, but not because if they don't, government will come in and do bad things to them. They need to stop it because it's just plain wrong, and if they want us to continue to use it, Tim, I would hope they would stop it, or we would abandon them for a preferable alternative.
There are a couple of approaches those who support the president have talked about, such as making the internet and Google and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube public utilities, and that would make them subject to government regulation. That seems to me to be a very slippery slope to fix the problem by giving the government more control.
If you care about liberty, if you care about freedom of thought and of action, you have to oppose that with every fiber of your being. That utility model, I would just say this, there are many models by which somebody gets to put on a boot and crush free speech. That happens to just be one of them. I don't have a preference as to which boot is used to crush it. I just stand in opposition of the crushing.
I would say that Facebook has drawn in literally over 1 billion users across the world, and they did it, though, under the premise that they were just a vessel, a portal for people to be able to communicate with one another. It wasn't until they built up that kind of subscriber base that they suddenly started censoring. We call it shadow banning, is one manifestation of it.
That's even more insidious than just plain old censoring.
Absolutely it is. So it's not like Facebook is without fault here. It's almost like there was a bait and switch. We'll draw you in, and then when it's too late, you'll realize that we are putting our fingers on the scale of what I would call balanced information. So, but the remedy, look, the cure is worse than the disease in the case of trying to make it a public utility or even allowing the government flat out to regulate a private company like this.
Even that instinct, Tim, I object to. The idea that somebody does something that you dislike intensely and you're, not you personally, of course, but and then the other notion is, well, let's get the government in here to do what I say, or else they can go and have their stuff taken or be put in a cage. That is the impulse that I want people to get away from.
That's the very thing that the left is doing right now. They are saying, if your opinion is not mine, it's unacceptable, and therefore you should not be allowed to speak, for example, on campus.
Shouldn't be able to have a job. Shouldn't be able to go to the store. Shouldn't be able to do anything, like a shunning. A proper aim is shunning.
Now, in a related story, dozens at Facebook unite to challenge its intolerant liberal culture.
So they have these community, essays and boards and whatever, I guess, and an engineer, a senior engineer called Brian Ameridge, wrote this post called "We Have a Problem with Political Diversity." And he said that we are a political monoculture that's intolerant of different views. And I just thought it was important. This one engineer's posting of this essay at the community bulletin board, if you know the name James Damore, he is the former Google engineer who posted about why there were fewer women in STEM with a factual recitation of the preferences that exist statistically.
Explain STEM, please.
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
Thank you.
Google, they're one of these caught up in this left-wing movement of women have to be equal representation, even as we're learning that there is, in fact, zero distinction between men and women except those different words that actually, biologically, that they're identical and all these other things that even though that's the case, there still has to be equal representation, I guess, of people who identify as men and women and others at Google. So James Damore said, well, listen, there's actually scientific reasons why this is, men gravitate to these fields and women pull away from them for reasons that...
But we've got to change that, Scott.
Well, that's why he had to be fired. And so anyway, I just thought this was interesting. This is one little essay, but it's made coverage. This is actually a New York Times story about a leak that somebody at Facebook then actually leaked the fact that there was this thing. And a company with many, many, many thousands of employees, there's 100 people who happen to agree and signed on to this this sort of essay. But I think it's actually encouraging that there is some dissension at Facebook. We know this guy's name, and if Facebook dumps him, at least, we can help rally around the cause of free speech. Again, not by saying to the government, let's put Zuckerberg in jail or take his stuff, but let's encourage him to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Well, I think here's where you can draw the distinction between what I call liberals and leftists. Liberals believe in free speech. They believe in open debate and dialogue, even if they hate what a conservative
that's the only thing
says.
That free speech is.
That's exactly right.
Yes,
but leftists do not believe that. And there's the distinction to be made on the left, circa
anybody who
2018.
Says, I believe in free speech, but does not believe in free speech.
Once the but creeps in there, but with one T, not two. By the way, I should explain shadow banning because some people don't understand it. I dropped that in earlier. That's when you post something and they don't allow anybody to see it, but you don't even know that.
Let me describe it differently, if I might, which is that the company has specifically designed their software to make you, the social media user, think that you are actively engaged with their platform, when in fact you're not. They are sequestering your posts and information in a way that makes other people not be able to see it, so you don't get the engagement. And I tell you, for somebody who works for an organization that gets a lot of their customers from social media, it's vitally important. And I actually think that there could be potentially some fraud issues there, Tim. If they're representing to people, right, that this is how the platform works, and those people put out considerable time and energy to manage their experience on that platform. And this is more true for businesses than it is for individuals, but still true for individuals, creating artwork, themes, and all that stuff. And then if they have the shadow ban come in, well, that's all for naught, isn't it? So anyway, just a curious legal...
and it's the most insidious form of censorship because you don't even know you're being
Can't
censored.
fight it if you don't know what's happening, right? You can't challenge them.
Indeed. Well, I got time for one more story.
Okay.
And this might apply to the left because they could be in trouble if they go to Myrtle Beach. Because if they curse, which they are prone to do when the very mention of Donald Trump comes up, it could cost them up to $500.
Yeah, this was a story that broke from the Sun News, who did a FOIA request for the citations that have been written for their cursing in public or profanity regulations. And the city took in over $20,000 in fines last year from writing these tickets, and they put people in jail for it, too. And I think it's a real disgusting display of totalitarianism in a small form. But, there are some universe of those people for whom $500 that they have to pay is a crushing struggle.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio, plus LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week. We, though, will be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.